Musicians, they're kind of born, if you have that love and that passion for it, then it's easy. No, it's not easy. It's never easy. But it's not work, as we consider work. We have a strange idea about work in the West, that work is something to be done and then at 5 o'clock forgotten all about, because we're going to now live. And a musician, true musician, doesn't feel like that. A musician doesn't have weekends or days off. Another day is the day of self-discovery and of discovery in the music. And it's marvelous. Just let me go back very briefly, because you really need to understand what I was exposed to as a young teenager. Directly the time the guitar came into my hands, having spent all my life to that point listening and playing classical music, Western classical music. My brother, all elder brothers, with two of them going to university, and brought into home what was known as the blues boom began in 1952 in the UK. So by 1953, when I was 11 years old, they came home with these fantastic blues records, and at the same time as I had the guitar. So immediately there's this connection between this instrument, even though I've grown up classical music, and I'm listening to these Mississippi blues players, and it was a revelation to me. It was absolutely phenomenal. It just blew my mind, and I adored this music from the very first moment. But thanks to my older brothers, within the next 5 years, I was exposed systematically to Indian music, which marked me also forever. Flamenco music, very powerfully, to the point where I would skip school the end of every month and hitchhike down to Manchester. I was living in a small town north in England, I had a brother at Manchester University, and I would hitchhike down to stay with him overnight, because he would sneak me into a pub illegally, of course, underage, but there was a real flamenco player called Pepe Martinez, and so I was exposed to live flamenco music, and actually I wanted to be a flamenco guitar player, but in the little town where I lived they'd never even heard of flamenco. He didn't know what flamenco was, and then very shortly after that, within a year after trying to learn flamenco from recordings, it was very difficult. You needed a teacher in flamenco. I heard Miles Davis, and really that was the end of my search for a particular discipline. It continues to influence my style today, because it's part of my life. India is part of a very important part of my life, interior and exterior. Exterior, it means in my art. I wouldn't be who I am without India and without the impact of the Indian culture on my life. The philosophy, the music, everything. But then I wouldn't be who I am without the impact of the Hispanic influence. But already the Hispanic influence, I could hear, because you listen to the early 20th century classical composers, particularly in the Impressionist school, and they adored the Hispanic influence. People like Ravel and Debussy. You listen to these early Impressionist the French school, basically, of the earlier 20th century, and you'll hear that was part of them. Listen to. There's a recording Miles made in 1958 called Miles Ahead, with the Gil Evans Big Band. On that, this was one of the pieces that just blew me away. It's called Blues for Pablo, and in it, Miles shows and expresses his profound affection for Hispanic traditions, because not only is he playing the blues, like he always did, Miles never left the blues, even with his phenomenal techniques, you hear how much he adored the Hispanic influence and this element of flamenco. And since I'd already become under the spell of flamenco, for me to hear Miles with this flamenco influence just consolidated everything that I felt about my direction. You know, it was perfect. The Mahavishnu Orchestra, this was a number of influences coming together, but I have to say that you know, we have to look at the 2 years prior to the creation of the Mahavishnu Orchestra, because I arrived in New York in early January '69 to play with Tony Williams, as I explained, and Khalid Yassin, Larry Young, the organ player. And it just so happened that I started working with Miles and recording with Miles at the same time. So I was doing 2 jobs in a way. Whenever I wasn't playing with Tony, I was playing with Miles, and I was recording with Miles, and of course I was recording with Tony. And I had two different jobs in a way. With Lifetime, with Tony, he really liked the music that I wrote. And so he constantly encouraged me to write music. And so I would say that a great deal of pre-work of Mahavishnu music was done in the years 69, 70 with Tony Williams and Lifetime. And don't forget, there was the year 1970, Jack Bruce joined us, who was my old comrade from Ginger Baker days and Graham Bond days. The violin, the counter instrument to the guitar, I wanted a violin. Is because my mother played violin? Probably. But I didn't want a jazz player. I wanted an R&B violinist. And which might sound strange, but I felt that's where my instincts led me. And then eventually I found Jerry Goodman playing in a band outside of Chicago called The Flock. That was, pretty unknown. But I heard him play, and I said, this guy is definitely for the band. And Billy Cobham, I met on the Jack Johnson recordings with Miles, which was a marvelous experience, very particular with Miles especially. In any event, after that recording, Billy and I became very dear friends. Don't forget, by this time, by 1971, around 1970, around this time, October, November 1970, I was already under the influence of Indian music. I was studying Indian music, and it was having an impact on me, especially with its rhythms and its compound rhythmical cycles. And I was finishing a concert near Boston with Miles, and all the musicians had gone home except Miles and myself, and we were just in the band room just chatting. And out of the blue, he turns around and he said, "It's time you formed your own band." And I said, "What? What is he saying?" Because, but I took it very seriously because he was the most honest man I had ever met. He was this little anecdote that I told you about his being honest with me about not being up to standard, just because he was brutally honest with himself. He was brutally honest with everybody, but you always knew where you were with Miles. It was great. It's wonderful to have this kind of honesty, and so I couldn't really figure it out, but I took him very seriously, and as if he says it, that means I have to do it. And by this time I'd known Billy, and just so happened at this very time I'd known Miroslav Vitus for a number of years. From, you will remember Miroslav Vitus, the great bass player. And he called me up one day, this is about 2 months after Miles had given me this order, put your own band together. And Miroslav, whom I'd been friends with for years, he was a very dear friend, he said, listen, John, we're putting a band together with Wayne and Joe Zawinul. It's going to be called Weather Report, and we want you to be in it. And I said, I would love to be in it, but I've got to do my own thing. Miles has told me to put my band together, so that I have to do it. And thank you, I would love to do it, but I have to do this. Because he's got faith in me, so I've got to justify that faith.
Of course.
So he said, well, that's great, okay. Well, listen, if you need a piano player, he said, because he's Czech, from Prague, he said, if you need a piano player, he said, you heard it, you don't know Jan Hammer, but he's out in California playing piano with Sarah Vaughan. He's really good. I said, well, if he's playing with Sarah Vaughan, he's really good. And so he gave me his number, and I called him, and he was ready. He was ready to move out of that classical jazz into new music.
Wow. And
really, that's how the band came about. And of course, by this time, I'd written a lot of music because of the 2 years I'd been with Tony. And Miles, I said there were two different kind of jobs. Miles, all he wanted were things from my R&B days, like what kind of, he'd play a chord, what do you hear? What was fascinating about Bitches Brew for me was that in the studio, I could see he didn't know what he really wanted, but he really knew what he didn't want. And that was great to see the artist in action.
Yeah.
Shaping us, telling us, directing us. Don't play this, play less.
Yeah, yeah.
Or just like this, or go to the drum, you say, and this, I learned more from Miles than I think I did from anyone.
Yeah.
About how to run a band, how to get the most out of your musicians. Because he was master at that, at getting things out of. He got things out of me on the very first recording I had no idea I could do, in a silent way.
Wow. Wow.
Absolutely amazed me. And I saw him do it many times to all the different players. It was amazing. That's like a, what can you say, genius?
Oh yeah. Picture this, you're sitting on a sidewalk cafe, enjoying your breakfast, and there's a little dog coming over to your table, and it sits down and it won't move, and it starts to sing. What would you do?
Listen.
Of course. And
I mean, if it's a singing dog, well, of course I'm going to listen. Wow, man, sing.
You have also jammed and recorded with Jimi Hendrix. And I wonder, what is the greatest memory you have from that period, flying south?
Well, I think, first of all, Jimmy was just a beautiful, lovely, sweet person, and absolutely unpretentious, which is actually my experience with all the great players, Miles too. Very simple, no pretension. It's the mediocre players who kind of like, moody and silly. And Jimmy was that. He was delightful. Just a so nice person. But I would put Jimmy on a very high position. Now, it's clear that he was not the musician of John Coltrane's level, for example. But on another aspect of music, they had a great deal in common. That certainly influenced me and millions of other players, because what Jimmy did to the guitar was revolutionary. I think he was helped by Eric Clapton. I think Eric did fantastic work in the 60s. with John Mayall and the Blues Breakers, and subsequently with my old pals Jack and Ginger, with Cream. And Jimmy, I think that had an impact on him, but then he took it to a different level. And I really adore Jimmy. I think he did marvelous things. He had such an impact on me, because already long before, actually years before, I heard either Eric or Jimmy. I didn't like this cool jazz guitar sound. For me, it was too cool. It was so cool. It was a bit cold. It missed the thing. And I've been listening to Coltrane and Miles, and of course the sheer passion of those players. And Coltrane, particularly when in 1964-65, when he brought out Love Supreme, and he's starting to play more than one note on the saxophone. Some of his notes, you can hear a chord almost. It's like distorted. And Jimmy took this distortion in a fantastic way, marvelous way. And so he had, I mean, I don't think, I wouldn't be who I am, how I play without Jimmy, but I wouldn't be who I am without B.B. King either.
Very good. So it's John's dedicated juice, and in this case I called it the delicate dimension.
Fusion. I walked in after a gig at the Village Vanguard with Mitch, who'd come to see us, and I mean, I walked in the studio and it was like hallucinating loud. You know, and I was playing this Gibson Hummingbird. You know what a hummingbird is? It's a round hole with the I plugged it in. I mean, and my guitar just freaked out, almost exploded.